Hello, welcome back. So we started our lesson today with looking at dollars and cents, and there was a specific reason why I wanted you to practice with dollars and cents and kind of warm your brain up with those before we got into our lesson today. And so I want to ask you a few questions. First of all, I want to know how many dimes are there in a dollar? Do you have your answer? I hope you said 10. So we can think about dimes in dollars like a fraction, just like on our fraction circles or a group of items. Whatever our whole is, we can break that into pieces, right? So if a dollar is one whole, and I just asked you how many dimes are in a dollar, hopefully you said 10, then you know that one dime would be what fraction of a dollar? Hopefully you said 1/10. So if it takes 10 dimes to get $1, then one of them would be 1 out of 10, or 1/10. So what we're practicing now with our fractions is recording them as decimals. So your 1/10 we can record as 1/10, the first place value next to your decimal point, okay? So there would be 1/10. But what about pennies? How many pennies does it take to make $1? Hopefully you said 100. So now we can have a way to write 1/100th of a dollar, a fraction, as a decimal. So we could say that penny is equal to 1/100th, right? Because it takes one penny, or I'm sorry, it takes 100 pennies to make our whole, our $1. So when we did this one, 1/10, we could write it as a decimal like this. Well, our 1/100th, we could also write that as a decimal. I'll scooch this over so it stays organized. We could write it as 1/100th. So the first place value was tenths, like a fraction of a whole. Our second place value is hundredths with the THS because it's 1/100th of a whole. Okay, so I have this picture here on the board for a reason. So hopefully you recognize this as a flat. When you first learned numbers, you called this a flat. And if you look at this and you think about it as tenths or longs, the long skinny piece, how many longs would it take to make a flat? You learned that when you were younger, you learned that there were 10. So if you have a group of 10 or a long, it would take 10 of these to make the entire flat. So on this picture, we can think of this as 1/10 of our whole. So if it takes 100 of these to make a flat, it would take a group like this, 10 of them, to make 1/10. Or 1/10. And we could continue counting those if we said this is 1/10, this is 2/10, this is 3/10. We know how to count fractions like that, right? Well, we could do the same thing with decimals. We could say this is 1/10, this is 2/10, the long, like that. This is 3/10, and so on. We could continue to count tenths on this hundreds chart or this flat, okay? We could do the same thing with counting the individuals. So we called these units, the cubes, when we were first counting out numbers, we would call those 1 cube or 1 unit. So on our flat, how many little ones would it take to fill up the whole flat? Hopefully you said 100. So I could call this one that I colored in over here 1/100th of my flat. I could also write that as my decimal 1/100th of my flat. Okay, so then if I were to count a second one, this would be 2/100ths, this would be 3/100ths, and so on across my board. I could write those still as decimals, 2 place values over. I could count them 100ths, 200ths, 300ths, and so on. So now what happens if I use the same picture and I count hundreds and tens and ones, if I count them all together? Let's start fresh here. What if I have, we'll say I have this one colored in, and I have this one colored in, and I have just this one colored in. Well, you learned already how to count that as 10, 20, 1, right? But if we're talking about this whole thing being a whole, we could say that this is, let me get a darker marker for this so you can see a little better. This is 21 out of 100 would be my fraction. It is 21 hundredths that we have colored. But I could also write that as a decimal, 21 in the hundredths place value, 21 hundredths. And we could continue that for any combination of numbers of tens and ones across our flat. So you're going to be practicing some of these today. Let me bring you up another screen. You're going to be practicing some of these today in your math journal. And before I send you off to do that, I want to show you some examples of how we can do that. Make that a little bit smaller maybe so it all fits on there, okay? So we just have a couple that we can practice together. So let's take a look at this. The first one is done for us. Let's look at what it shows us. Okay, I notice that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 longs and 1 unit. So I could say that that is 41, right? But if we say it as a fraction, or, well, yeah, we could start with that. As a fraction, I could call it 41 hundredths. I could also call it the decimal point 41 hundredths. Now they're showing us this in coins because it really helps us to understand that we're talking about the whole. If we think about change, it takes 100 cents to make $1, so there's our 100. So if we think of that 41 as money, we could say 41 cents, that would be a quarter, a dime, a nickel, and a penny would give us 41 cents. So we have all these different ways of talking about these numbers and writing them down in different ways. We can write them as money, we can draw them as a picture, we can write them as a fraction or a decimal, and it all represents a similar kind of idea. So let's take a look at number 2 because that one's not done for us. In fact, I'm going to get another color so that we can see it a little bit better, okay? So I see down here a quarter, a quarter, a quarter. So 25, 50, 75 plus a dime would be 85, right? So if I'm going to color an 85 on a hundreds chart, we know that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 would be 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85. Okay, and you can shade those in solidly if you want. I was just marking it for the sake of time to show you 85. So if this were pennies, I would have 85 cents. If I were writing this as a fraction, I would have 85 hundredths. Remember that THS, 85 hundredths. Okay, if I was going to write that as a decimal, I have no holes, okay, because I'm doing less than a whole, and I have 85 hundredths, okay? We can also do it the other way. So these are blank here, but let's look at this number 6 because this one's already been colored for us. So I can draw in a number or I can count a number either way, right? If I count this, I'd have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 51, 52. So I have a total of 52, in this case pennies, 52 cents. What could I use to make that? I could use 2 quarters is 50 cents, and 2 pennies would be 52. 25, 50, 51, 52. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 51, 52. And then how can I write that as a fraction? I can call it 52 out of 100 in my whole, 52 hundredths. Or I could write it as a decimal, 0 and 52 hundredths. Okay, now it's your turn. You're going to practice some of these in your math journal and see how you do.